All right, welcome to another session of Objectivist Q&A. Let's dive right in with the first question. What I could not understand, I'm excerpting from a longer question about libertarianism. What I could not understand in the 1980s and 1990s and still can't understand is the animosity that some objectivist leaders have regarding libertarians in general. I'm wondering if you can help me understand. I do realize that Objectivism is an integrated philosophy and the Libertarian Party is a political party. Anyone can register in the LP by going to their register of voters. So there are nuts in the party, there are statists in the party, there are anarchists in the party. But those are a very small minority of people who represent the party. I think that I must be missing something that is obvious, but whenever I think about it, I can't find it. Can you help me understand this? I hope so. So there's actually a few different questions here, so let me try to separate them. First, on the alleged point that, or on the alleged animosity that some objectivists have had towards libertarians, you may not know the history here, but in a way this is an unfair accusation because the animosity actually started the other way, which is that the libertarian movement in its modern form really starts with Murray Rothbard, and Rothbard was friendly with Rand at one time early on, and then, he basically was using her ideas without attribution and lying about where he learned these ideas, and was behind her back being extremely insulting towards her and to other objectivists. And so it's to say that there's animosity that's come from objectivists to libertarians, let's call it a mutual animosity and not one that Ayn Rand herself initiated. But the second and more relevant thing here is that it's not just that the libertarians divorced the objectivist politics from the rest of the objectivist philosophy, right? And that in effect it's just saying they're holding on to the objectivist politics, but they're not explicitly embracing all of the rest. What Rothbard and other people who were formulating what is libertarianism actually said was that you could have a political philosophy regardless of the rest of philosophy. So it wasn't just segregating the objectivist politics. It was saying that politics doesn't require any underlying foundational ideas. And in fact, liberty could be defended on any philosophic basis or none at all. And since philosophy is actually, in fact, inescapable, what this really amounted to was itself embracing a certain philosophic foundation of subjectivism. And that then shows up in the fact that their politics is actually not objective. It's not in favor of an objective legal system protected by government. It is, in the end, not a version of liberty. What it is anti-government rather than pro-liberty. And this is something that objectivists have argued at length, but the quintessential illustration of this is the fact that anarchism is not just regarded as part of the libertarian movement. It is regarded as the most consistent application of being pro-liberty. And I maintain that this is true even for people in the movement who are not anarchists. That if you actually look at when they'll discuss anarchy, many of them will even say, yeah, it's the ideal, but it's not very practical. There's very few people within libertarianism who say, this is completely wrong, has nothing to do with liberty, and would be a disaster if it resulted. It's that there's a pure concession of anarchism as at least a theoretical ideal. But on objectivism's view, if you take seriously what liberty is and the fact that it is a state in which we are free from force, and that you need a government to place the use of retaliatory force under the control of objective laws, then anarchism is the complete opposite of liberty, because its actual concrete examples in the world are literal brute warfare, and so that it's fundamentally similar to totalitarianism rather than liberty. And so the point that when objectivists stress that libertarianism thinks that you can do without philosophy, it's much deeper than saying, hey, we really care about philosophy and these guys don't pay enough attention to it. It's that in doing so, they completely undercut liberty at the very root and hand a blank check or a moral authority to the most rabidly anti-liberty movement, or one of them, which is anarchism. Now, I'm super sympathetic to people who look at the two mainstream parties and think, I want nothing to do with either of these. Why can't we have a party that actually promotes liberty? But I don't think that the Libertarian Party is better, and I don't think that supporting them is practical. I don't think that you can, excuse me. And when I say it's not better, I mean, I've met a number of libertarians and the people involved in the party, and I'm not saying this is 100% true of every person who is involved in the party, but just my experience has been that contrary to what you say, many, if not most of them, are anarchist crackpots and weirdos, and I certainly would want to have nothing to do with them just on that basis. But on the practical point, you can't shortcut education. That is, people reject liberty because they do not value it, and they do not value it largely because of certain underlying ideas, but also just because they haven't been educated in it, and you can't educate through a political party. Now, when I say like education is the solution rather than practical politics, that doesn't mean that like, oh, we just need to focus on like getting objectivists into Harvard or something. That's not what I'm talking about, and I don't even think that is a high priority. That's at most like the least of what it means. What it means is that we have to be able to persuade people that of our ideas so that there's a meaningful coalition of people who are pro-liberty, both overall, but even just on specific issues. So, for example, Alex Epstein, author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, with whom I've worked for now several years full-time, and had worked with him a lot in the past in various contexts, he's created, or helping to create, a meaningful coalition of people who understand the moral case for fossil fuels and how to defend it, and who value that. And that includes not just like students in a class somewhere, but it includes like some of the leading CEOs in the energy industry. It includes lots of politicians and lots of people who are involved in practical politics. So if you actually want to have an influence on practical politics, the way is not to run, candidates like Joe Jorgensen who are talking about like, I'm going to protect your right to a tank and Black Lives Matter, let alone the even worse examples who have come earlier in history. The way is be educational in the way that Alex is, and in whatever innovative ways you can find, so that you can create a coalition, so that, hopefully in 20, 30 years, there is an actual opportunity at scale to get political leaders in who value liberty. But today, there simply is not. All right, so this is definitely going to be a big jump. Is watching porn bad? My thinking is that the viewer of porn is almost always viewing it for the purpose of escapism, which is bad. But even if it isn't escapism for him, or her, I would add, the viewing is still sanctioning the making of porn, and making of porn necessarily involves the devaluing of sex for the performers. I remember, I think I've even mentioned this in the Q&A, Leonard Peikoff used to say that like these were his favorite kind of questions, but they're not my least favorite. But I find that issues in the realm of sex are very difficult to think about objectively, and I certainly want to be very careful not to pollute that realm with providing people with unearned guilt, while at the same time not falling into the trap of saying like everything and anything goes. And just as an aside, one of the most vile, evil things is there's really a trend, and I think a growing trend, of like shaming masturbation. And Jordan Peterson, for example, has been one of the loudest outspoken people here, but others as well. And for all that I admire about Peterson, like, may he rot in hell for that. So when it comes to pornography and setting aside like obvious cases of like, child and where it's like literally clearly evil, I'm extremely hesitant to say anything that would even like potentially induce guilt in somebody without being super confident that there's a real harm involved in it to oneself or to others. And so what I will say is this: be thoughtful about everything you do. I mean, about sex, about everything that you do, and including the use or consumption or creation, for that matter, of pornography. Like, but be thoughtful doesn't mean like be suspicious of yourself and be on the lookout for, oh, evil me. It means know what you're doing and think about what is the positive that I'm after here, and is this a good way to pursue it, and are there any negatives that might be obvious or non-obvious. And if you don't see any problems and you see a real value there, like, go for it. And even if you eventually learn out, oh, maybe I was wrong and that caused some problems, like, that's fine. Like, you're entitled to errors of knowledge. And, just as a final concrete, like, if you're bothered about the morality of the performers, well then, watch homemade porn. It's better anyway. Next question. I had a question of meaning behind Eddie Willer's, and especially the end part of his story. What did Ayn Rand want to express through his character? So Eddie Willer's, who I have to admit is not my favorite Ayn Rand character. I think he's, I just don't respond to him very well. But he's certainly an important character in Atlas, and you can learn a lot for him. And so, like, who is Eddie? And the first thing that people will usually say is something like, well, he's the average man, or he's the man of average intelligence or ability. And all of that is certainly true, but he's actually exceptional. He's exceptional morally. That is, he, the same as all the heroes, is always striving his best to do the best. He doesn't have as much moral knowledge as Dagny, or certainly not Galt, but he's striving to achieve the best within us and to figure out more and more what is the best within us. And in that sense, he's a moral hero. And so the question is, well, like, why does Ayn Rand need a character like that? And I think from the perspective of the theme more than the plot, she's trying to illustrate the role of the mind in human life, and in particular, the role of the way in which we all depend on the best minds, the most intelligent, the most rational, the real innovators and creators who move knowledge and value creation forward. And so she, in order to be able to isolate that aspect of it, it couldn't just be that all of the moral characters were geniuses and all of the immoral characters weren't, or something. You had to have a person of the same moral level of character who was not a great innovator and who was not a great achiever, and then you needed to see that they themselves could not hold the world on their shoulders. And so that gets then to the plot function of Eddie in the book. So at the beginning, a core plot function of him is just, we need to see the world through his eyes, because she wants us to be haunted and troubled by the state of the world and confused by the state of the world. And, the villains, that's not going to work for obvious reasons, but it's not going to work with somebody like Dagny either, because even though she's puzzled and in a sense troubled by the state of the world, it's more like the world let her down. Whereas with Eddie, it's a real haunting sense that there's something terrible. Whereas Dagny has a confidence that she can succeed in the world, and to her, the only puzzle is why there's so much evil in a world where the good is efficacious. And then, of course, to get to Eddie's fate at the end, and spoiler alert, I won't go into it in great detail. I'll try to speak a little bit around it, but it should be obvious. Ayn Rand's leaving it deliberately open, not that the man of moral character but average intelligence is necessarily crushed, in a dictatorship or a collapsing society, but that it's an accident. Whereas, her belief was the men of superlative and women of superlative intelligence and ability and morality will be able to find a way no matter what. The people of lesser intelligence and ability, even if they're very good, are their fate is really not in their hands, or not fully in their hands. And that is why it's doubly important for them to have a society where you liberate the best minds. And so I think that's the core of what's going on with Eddie. Next question. I definitely see the benefits of holding an objectivist philosophy in my career. I am constantly commended for my work and have witnessed my self-development expand tremendously, in no small part due to both my commitment to clarity of concepts and my work ethic, which is driven by clear values that I hold. However, I still think that my philosophy would help me more in achieving my goals if only I were to more consistently apply the philosophy. Are there any concepts that you think objectivists should leverage more to help them with career development or self-improvement? So I actually think this is an area that's way underexplored, but I'll name a few things, and really most of them are just questions that one can regularly and should regularly ask oneself that will automatically bring philosophy to bear without like some, attempt to construct, a theoretical chart bridging pages, and chapters, and OPAR to like specific work projects. So the first was the most important, which is, what's my purpose? And, this can be asked at every level of viewing your life and your work, all the way down to you're sitting down to write an email and just giving it yourself a quick check of what's my purpose. And what that question does is, by clarifying exactly what you're after in conscious terms, you're bringing to bear a much wider set of knowledge than you otherwise would, including your widest, most powerful, high leverage conceptual knowledge from philosophy. And so this is something that philosophy teaches you, that you should always be functioning on purpose. And then by being self-consciously on the premise of what's my purpose in everything that you do, you'll naturally access philosophy in a way that you won't if you don't. The next question, and the questioner indicated this is something that he's already benefiting from, clarity of concepts, but the next question to have is like, what does this mean? And that is just being very aware of the concepts you use, particularly whenever you're in a specialized area. There's a specialized set of concepts, many of which are embedding lots of assumptions, and depending on what industry you're in, one of the benefits of language is that it's been around a long time, and that's no guarantee that the concepts are good, but it does tend to take out of usage concepts that are really, really bad. Again, not 100% guarantee. I mean, something like, selfishness has been polluted, but if you wanted to make a list, for example, of anti-concepts and of package deals, the list would be, my guess is, predominantly made up of relatively new words in the last like 50 years that at least gain currency, rather than long-standing words, even though long-standing words make up the bulk of the concepts that we actually have and use. But the same thing then happens in any industry where you have, in effect, a subculture, is there's lots of terminology, and much of it could have been created, relatively recently. And even if the concepts themselves are good, you have to actually have mastery over those concepts. And most people are not in the habit of really thinking, what does this mean in reality? And do I really understand it? And that is really one of the most high leverage things you can have, which is a very reality oriented and concretized and distinct, precise understanding of all your concepts that you're playing with. Then another question from epistemology is like, what's the status of this? So what's the epistemic status, or like, do I really know this or not? How clear am I on this idea? And most people are trapped in a world of, I kind of know what I mean, and it's okay to kind of know what you mean. What you want to do is know that, okay, this is something I don't have certainty on. And Greg Salmieri gave a wonderful talk that's available on YouTube called Thinking Objectively, where he talks about just this going about your life, whenever you find yourself ready to use or take action on the basis of an item of knowledge, just asking like, where did I get this from? How certain am I of it? And being really clear, this is just something I heard. It's not something I've processed. Or this is something that is possible. There's some evidence for it that I've seen and assessed. This is probable. The preponderance of the evidence suggests that this is the case, and there's nothing that contradicts it. And then this is certain. This is something I'm willing to build on and move forward with without hesitation. And being really clear on how clear you are with any given idea is just going to give you tremendous help in being efficacious in the productive realm, just as it does in the rest of life. Finally, there's two more things. So one is just really taking advantage of the Traitor Principle. How good is this for both of us? And I want to highlight the both of us. This is something that John Allison used to really stress, or I'm sure still does really stress, when he talks about the Traitor Principle, which is the Traitor Principle. We can be tempted to think it's just the act itself must be good for both parties for it to take place. But the Traitor Principle, as Ayn Rand understands it, is really that you yourself should be thinking in any interaction, certainly an interaction that's occurring over time. And I think most of our most important productive relationships occur in this way. You should be thinking not just about how you benefit in the next and leaving it to the other party to think about how they're benefiting, but you should be thinking, how are they benefiting? Is this genuinely good for them? And I think that, first of all, it will save you from a lot of problems, but it's very, very helpful in really making sure that what you're doing is creative. Like I just remember even when I was starting this business and trying to decide, all right, I can create a lot of content and sell it. Part of the reason I didn't do that is that my main goal is to scale the advocates for great ideas as much as possible, and I don't want money to be a barrier to that. But the other one was that I'm too aware maybe of the amount of content that's like put out there for pay and sold with really clever marketing that is like harms people. That's a waste of money for them, that it's stuff that like they wouldn't have paid for, except they get caught up in an emotional moment and somebody knows how to push their buttons. And my view was like, is it really good for people to spend money on my content? Well, I certainly think it is, but I would much rather have them consume my content and then voluntarily decide to support my work through, what I called it, a semi-Patreon, Patreon model without Patreon. That is the way I feel most comfortable that they're benefit. That way, if somebody doesn't benefit, I don't want their money anyway. Like, I don't want to make the sale and then, well, if you didn't benefit, better luck next time. No, I only want to achieve income from somebody once they've decided they've gotten the value. So I think that's a really underutilized thing. And then finally, there's I think, treasure trove of knowledge in the realm of psychoepistemology, which objectivists have only started to scratch the surface on. But I highly recommend particularly Harry Binswanger's 2 lecture courses, Psychoepistemology 1 and Psychoepistemology 2. And in particular, he goes into a lot of detail about how to actually file things in your mind so you have an organized mind where you can access knowledge in the most efficient, effective ways possible. And then he also talks, if I recall correctly, it's been years since I've listened to this, about this idea that in objectivism of standing orders, which is in effect giving your subconscious an order that be on the lookout for X. And so, for example, and I think I'm getting this from Harry, like if you want to, he might not use this exact one, which my reaction here will be ironic once I give it to you. But let's say that you want to develop a better speaking voice, and so you want to eliminate filler words like and and those kinds of hesitations. You set your subconscious with a standing order. Notice when I use filler words or I'm about to use filler words, stop and pause instead. And if you do that, that allows you to notice it. you won't catch it every time. What would usually happen at the beginning is that you'll use the filler words, and then afterwards you'll kind of wince and kick yourself. But now you've reinforced this standing order because, in effect, your mind has gotten a little punishment of, oh, you failed me. And so over time, you can get to the point where your natural automatic reaction whenever you're tempted to use a filler word is not even to be tempted, but just to pause and go on with the thought. And so I should really go through the effort of doing exactly that. I'm way better than I used to be, and certainly better than some, but I still, particularly when I'm dealing with ideas or thoughts that I haven't fully worked out yet, can fall into some level of ums, ahs, and other kinds of filler words. Although notice that right now I'm not doing it because my subconscious has been primed. Last question this time. Jeff Bezos said that his decision to found Amazon was made with his heart, not with his head. Are objectivists sometimes missing opportunities by being too logical? Well, look, we certainly, let me just say at the beginning, I admire Jeff Bezos enormously and don't want to put any words in his mouth. But I followed his work quite a lot, and we certainly know that it's not literally true. He went with his head or his heart rather than his head. Like, it was not a blind emotional choice where he just got out of bed one day and said, yeah, I'm going to quit I think he was on Wall Street at the time, or he was in some kind of like high financial related job, and said, I'm just going to throw away, a few $100,000 a year in a salary at a job I'm succeeding at in order to give this Amazon thing a go. Like, he was very thoughtful about it and talked to others to get input and really worked with the idea for a lot of time before he decided to pull the trigger. What it was a choice made under uncertainty. And if you hear him describe it, like what he's talking about as the head is really the safe, conventional choice that you could easily defend on paper. And what he's talking about when he's talking about his heart is really it was his unflinching rational recognition that this probably will fail. But it was also a rational recognition on his part that, as he would describe it, he was on the policy of minimizing regrets. And he knew that the worst case scenario was he would create Amazon, it would probably fail, but he would know he at least tried. Well, that is a very rational attitude. There's nothing heart-driven about that in the sense of just being like a blind emotional, throwing your reason aside, evading the facts of reality. No, he went in with his eyes wide open. And in fact, the initial seed money he got was from his parents. And it was just a significant portion of their life savings. And he told them, he said, you will probably lose this. He didn't try to whitewash it for people in the hopes that they'd give him, their money and maybe I can make it work out. The kind of like how people get trapped in Ponzi schemes is they oversell and underdeliver and then are too afraid to acknowledge the truth. He was totally clear in his own mind of the risk he was taking, and he made it totally clear to the people he dealt with the risks that he was taking. So he was operating enormously rationally in an area of enormous uncertainty. And what people do is they confuse rational with sort of like data-driven, metric-driven, the kind of thing that like an accountant would say, this is clearly a great idea. That is not what it means to be rational. What to be rational really means is to be reality-oriented rather than blindly emotional. There's I talk about this in an upcoming podcast, the difference between explicit learning and implicit learning. And, intellectuals tend to only value explicit learning, but objectivism does not take the view that only fully worked out conceptualized knowledge is legitimate. And it couldn't, because Ayn Rand was an artist and discussed a lot about the need to operate by your subconscious. But particularly if you think about the context of businessmen and what they operate in, they're dealing with having to make many, many decisions with high levels of uncertainty under time pressure. And to have the idea that that could be done through explicit reasoning in every case and that would get you to the right answer is just a fantasy, any more than the idea that a baseball pitcher trying to hit a base could just like work out the reasoning for where the ball is going to go through like, a bunch of geometry. No, you develop pattern recognition over time and you react in the moment. But notice that what is really going on here is that even for a baseball player, it's not that you just have pattern recognition that's blind. Like baseball players just sit around and blindly swing a bat at 1,000 baseballs and hope that they get better and better through recognizing patterns. It's that you're constantly informing your rational mind by learning different principles of hitting, where exactly to put your hands, by reevaluating why didn't it work? Why did I hit that? Why did that hit turn into, a dribble down the baseline rather than a home run? What was I doing with my elbow? What was I doing with the angle of the bat? Was I too far ahead or too far behind the ball? There's a lot of rational assessment of the automatic and the implicit that is going on whenever people have to operate and perform through the automatic functions of their subconscious. And this is certainly true at Amazon. So first of all, Jeff Bezos would talk about, we use tons of metrics. We have tons of data. We have a lot of principles to guide our decision-making processes. But we know that that cannot possibly capture everything, particularly if we're trying to project what the future is going to look like. And so what we want to do is be informed by our subconscious, which can take in and integrate a much wider amount of data. And so, like, for instance, he puts a lot of stress on anecdotes, like emails from customers and things, because this is going to capture stuff that the data won't. So if there's, for example, and he didn't give this example, but you can imagine a small number of users complain about like one specific feature. Well, in the data, we're still making profit. There's still a lot of people using this, but is this something we need to fix? Well, his subconscious is going to tell him, oh, this is the kind of thing that's going to create friction that like a competitor could take advantage of, or that will just lead to, many fewer and fewer Amazon customers returning, whatever the case may be. But it's that constant using of your subconscious mind, your gut instinct, which was created by rationally assessing your experience on the front end and the back end, and then monitoring your gut as you go along. And I think that's really what's required, and I think that is actually what Objectivism upholds. And it's true that it can be taken sometimes to mean like, no, you're just blindly focused on explicit logic, but I don't think that actually comes from the philosophy. A good thing to read in this regard is Ayn Rand's books on fiction and nonfiction writing, whereas she has her most extensive discussions about the role of the subconscious and how creative work demands reliance in certain contexts on the subconscious. And so I highly recommend that for just this kind of question. That's it for this time. Hope everybody subscribes to the YouTube channel. Make sure if you want to send in questions, you can send them to don@donswriting.com, or I have a link in the YouTube comments below. So thanks, everybody. Look forward to talking soon. And as always, you can sign up for my newsletter at donswriting.com. Talk soon.